Cool. Well, how's it going, everyone? I guess we're gonna start the meeting now. Let's let people trickle in as they do. Today we'll be covering native Linux forensics, a topic that I'm sure all of you are absolutely thrilled to know more about. All right, so a few announcements before we start. Cyberforce teams should be set. I think we finished that up last night. We finished up the roster, sending out emails to the platform today. I think a lot of people in here are part of a team, so if you are, let's do great when we're there. And then post October 3rd, we'll announce some training with ITI. I think Michael got us in contact with a few professors there, so get to work with them a little bit. That should be pretty cool. Yeah, and if you are on a team alternate, please show up. It'd be really cool. And if you are attending Cyberforce, check your emails. If you haven't submitted their consent to being like photographed and stuff, please get that done ASAP.
Yeah. Let me jump.
Oh yeah, Michael, go ahead.
Keep it moving. The ITI faculty that are involved. So as you guys know, Purple Team competes in different cyber defense competitions. That some of them are open invite, and we'll get a chance to have everybody do that kind of thing together. Others, they larger like acronyms, including Cyberforce and CCDC. Typically goes to people who, one, been attending, usually have the kind of experience that we think that is best to place you on the team. So that's the criteria that we use to evaluate in the first place. The ITI faculty that we're going to be working with, we will have a mentor who will be with us up until the Cyberforce competition, and that is Professor SIGPwny. And then we'll have coaches who will reach out to us at some point to provide structure and like training outside of Purple Team meetings or CCDC. And so we'll have ITI faculty who will train us and get us up to speed on what they expect us to do. So, yeah, I mean, come talk to me after. You want to know more about how we plan to do that kind of thing?
Yeah, cool beans. Thank you, Michael. All right, there's the meeting flag. Everything is a file. Chris, you smiled at that briefly. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, those meeting slides have you can just copy that, put in the CTF and roll. All right, brief overview. So we're going in intro to endpoint forensics since we're working with Linux endpoints, so kind of have to do forensics on an endpoint. From there, we'll go into key artifacts you'll be looking at, how to actually collect those both manually and with some automation in there, and they'll go into I'll show a lot of different commands and some insight on how to do live response in the sort of competitions that we'll be doing, because it's not like we can take a full disk image and go analyze it in depth in like the 8 hours we have total. So just some stuff about that. Any questions? Cool beans. All right, intro to endpoint forensics. So as I'm sure you can probably guess where this is going, endpoint forensics is the act of collecting, preserving, analyzing digital evidence from hosts. So like actual virtual machines, laptops, pretty much anything that is basically its like own computer. That's what endpoint forensics is. Focuses on should not be there. We have to edit that out of the final slides. Sorry about that. So the aim is to either detect attacker actions on what we suspect are compromised machines, while at the same time keeping the boxes as close to their original compromised state as possible. And this just allows us to make sure what we're looking at is going to be accurate. And once we have that evidence, we're able to see what actually happened, what sort of malware is on the system, any persistence mechanisms that they put in place, what data was exfiltrated, how they actually exfiltrated it, and any other information that would be helpful in detecting attacker actions. I think it was 2 weeks ago we talked about network forensics. That's pretty useful. A lot of data is transported over in network traffic, but we learned a lot from the host level, and we're able to get much more granular because so much of it is saved. Ooh. Okay, larger picture. So a lot of the times in CCDC or Cyberforce, you'll hit like ps.-aux and be like, ooh, that process looks suspicious, and you just hit kill that thing. I think a lot of us, or any of you competing competitions before, that's something you've probably done before. But that is not the end of the road when actually trying to remediate a cyber attack or anything that an attacker does. We need to figure out how they got it in the first place, the techniques they did, how to do that, and what they're actually doing on the system. And that's where the forensics part on the endpoints come in. And once we actually understand how we did that, that makes remediating it that much easier because we actually know how to get them out of the system now. Just an example there. Once we figure out how all the ways an attacker maintains persistence, it's a heck of a lot easier to remove those. You get rid of a malicious cron job, um, especially remove that system D service. That just makes it that much easier. And once we figure out how an attacker is running their operations from our analysis, it makes it easier to then implement detection measures into our current system. So let's say we have like Elastic EDR running all these boxes. You can write specific YAR rules to catch any malware that they're installing or rootkit detections. So that just makes us stronger over time if we actually understand how attackers are functioning. And this is just going to be a brief bit on chain of custody. In actual forensic investigations, like where someone is, I don't know, trying to document, or the FBI is trying to document a cyber criminal, there's rigorous standards for how they collect, preserve, store evidence to make sure that the FBI didn't do any, as you say, editing of the evidence to sell a certain story. It's just keeping everything in stasis and as is for a lot of time. We're not worrying too much about this just because there's not a lot of opportunities for us to like actually collect additional evidence like in the competitions we do, and even in labs. It's mainly just figuring out what happened and how to resolve that. But it's always good to keep this stuff in mind because if you actually are interested in this and go on to do it professionally, this is something that is incredibly important. You need to keep all of your evidence in line and going from there. Exactly. Building good habits is always a good thing. All right. Any questions on previous stuff? Weeks. All right. So I'm getting into some key Linux forensic artifacts. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of these things. And if we were going to cover them all, we'd be here for like a month. So condense it down to like the main ones. Just brief overview of the Linux directory layout. For those of you who might not be as familiar with Linux, there's a pretty somewhat strict hierarchy of the file system. Certain things go in certain places. Like you're not going to store a whole bunch of services in the /temp directory, but you are going to like mount a USB drive in the /mount and other things like that that just cue you in on what should be where, and if anything is a little out of place, cues you off on things. And artifacts. If any of you don't know what an artifact is, forensic artifacts, at least for the digital forensics realm, are any traces left behind on a compromised system that reveal any user, process, and attack activity. Those just allow us to figure out what happened and hopefully when. So if someone is able to steal credentials and log into a box that they don't normally do, that's an artifact, and like the auth.log file. If they run onepiece.sh, well, we can see that in the command history. That's another artifact. And once we have a whole bunch of these in our system, we're able to piece together an attack from these things and just figure out how everything actually went down. All right, starting off with command line history. This is about as easy as you can get. So you can either just use the command history or go into the bash or ZSH history. What those files do is they log all of the commands run by a given user. And so this allows us to see what exactly they did in the terminal. If they're running scripts, running different commands, opening up connections to remote boxes, SSHing into other boxes. Again, here, like running unnamed onepiece.sh is pretty easy to sign. And a lot of malicious action that the attacker does typically starts from the command line. So this is very useful in finding it. Also, if they're making like connections and they don't have encrypted credentials, you can see like what they're logging in with, which can be quite useful. Moving on to Linux logs. This is by no means all the logs that are on a Linux box. There's so many more, and definitely not in this var log. So feel free to explore your system, figure out where a lot more stuff is. So, but anyway, slash var log is probably the central place where most of the logs that we'll be working with are stored. There's all sorts of stuff. The main ones probably auth.log, everything related to login attempts, authentication failures. Every use of sudo is in here. Same thing with SSH logins that'll all be stored here. You can also detect brute force attacks, but the whole chain of failed logins in a row. You also have the syslog, where you get generic or just general system events. So if something is repeatedly crashing your computer, get queued in with that. Um, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that one. Also, cron.log. So that stores the creation and execution of cron jobs. That's a very common method of persistence. So if you're able to see, like, after suspicious logon, they create a cron job pretty quickly, put two and two together, you're like, that seems a little suspicious. Start looking into that more. It also has a whole flurry of other stuff. Feature.log, nginx, boot.log, a bunch of other firewall logs. Very useful. All right, SSH configurations. I'm sure everyone loves this. This can etc/SSH contains all the SSH daemon settings. So how to accept connections, what you can use. This is important, especially with authentication methods are allowed, because it's a lot. It's a bit more difficult to log with the public-private key pair than it's just straight password. It takes a bit more effort. Also, root long is allowed. You can also find the host's public and private SSH keys here. And this is another common method of persistence. If they add their own private key here, that allows them to, again, SSH back in to the system later. Or if they find SSH keys in here that allow you to log in as root, that's another pretty big way of doing privilege escalation. Same thing with auth.log, documents from access attempts. Briefly mentioned that earlier. Oh, also, in every user's home directory, there's a .ssh folder. It's just hidden. You won't be able to see it by default. And this contains a known hosts list. So if you have a general idea of what hosts should connect to a box, like an admin bot connects to a mail server to do some just like remote administration, like that should be a known host. And maybe it's like the only one, but then you see like two or three more hosts connecting to the box. You can't tell which host they are because they hash it, but you're able to figure out what ones are legitimate by hashing like the host names of the any legitimate connections and figure out like, something is amiss. That's another key point here. Always check for hidden files. They store a lot of very useful information. A lot of configuration details can be hidden in there, so always add a -a after your ls. All right, cron jobs. Talked about these a lot. If you haven't figured out what they are, they're just a scheduled tasks that run any sort of command or script at a specified time or occurring schedule. Those two locations contain cron jobs, or cron tabs as well, but cron jobs. Again, pretty easy to use these for persistence just by making scheduled tasks that does any sort of malicious things the attacker wants it to. All right, package management logs. So it really depends on the distribution for this. There's a whole host of different areas for this just because most distributions use different package managers. For DPKG, this contains everything related to package management for DB and Ubuntu, every installation, upgrade, removal. This is useful if an attacker makes their own like personal package of, let's say, a backdoor into it, and they're able to load it in. You can find those logs here. For apps is pretty much like a front end to DPKG, and it just makes package management a lot easier. And you're able to see through this all of the terminal output from APT operations, especially if they're downloading packages from non-standard mirrors. You can see those URLs in this log file, which can be useful in certain scenarios. And same thing for dandified yum and yum. Pretty similar. All right. So when looking through these, just some common things to keep in mind. These are pretty standard principles for looking for strange things. any packages with random gibberish names, packages fell from unusual locations, any installations that have a little bit weird packages, like nothing in an actual network should be installing cryptocurrency miners. That's just like a no-go. That should queue you off in anything. Same thing, like no one really is going to be using Nmap for legitimate purpose. So, or at least in most, goodness, in most like enterprise environments. So always keep that in mind. Also, if they remove different packages that are used for security purposes, that can also queue you in on a malicious activity. All right. So yeah, like I said earlier, this is just a pretty short list of the stuff that you can, or forensic artifacts you can find on Linux boxes. One thing that I would encourage you to do is just start rolling through your Pony OS box and seeing all the sorts of information you can find on it. And if you like, think about this: if you were an attacker, what actions that you took, what logs would those generate? What would it create? Because that gets you thinking both from like a defender's perspective, like where can I look for these things, and also from the attacker's perspective, how can I minimize my footprint on these boxes and be more stealthy? So, yeah. All right. Evidence collection. So I'm moving pretty fast through this. Does anyone have any questions so far? Comments? Concerns?
Well, as this kind of you have to run it as well. But I know there are ways to like, for example, simplest example is like your bash history. There are ways to like turn off history collection when you run commands. How common are those, and like, are there other ways to do that? Is that something we need to look at?
I think that's a question better suited for Ronan.
Yeah, I was going to say I want to preface this by like my Linux based knowledge is a lot more limited than my Windows knowledge. But you always have write access over your phone. So a common thing I'll do is hop on, and the first thing I'll do is I'll cat my history and see what's been on there, see if there's any credentials. And the second thing I'll do, because I can save that if I need to, right? I'll simply dev null, or you could do unset $hist file or something like that. And that's going to just completely not log any of the commands. However, I don't know how it's configured in a lot of them. You will probably still be having process creations and such on syslog, and I believe syslog requires root to go right to that.
Yep.
So yeah, I can go revise history to look like whatever I want in my own like bash history and stuff. And you can do other dirty tricks like operating out of memory file systems like /dev/shared memory. So when you reboot it, it just goes away. So you can like shred it and then reboot. So for sure, it's never going to be there. But that should still be leaving artifact at least syslog, probably in places.
All right. I guess we'll be moving on. All right, evidence collection. So now we know what to look for. How we figure out how to like actually get it off of the box. Okay, first off, well, we touched on this earlier, principles of how to actually collect evidence. The most important part is modify as little as you possibly can. Again, the more things you touch, the less accurate your information is going to be. The chance you like accidentally overwrite a chunk of memory that an attacker is stored like a loader in, the possibility that it just increases over time as you continue to make more changes. So you're just trying to preserve as much as possible. Because the live host basically is evidence. Think of this as like not necessarily a bloody gun, because it's not like actually going to cause harm to anyone, but it can be changed, and try and minimize that as much as possible. Think of it, it might go to court. Probably won't. It won't in our scenario, but in real life, yes. And also document everything, like who was at this specific box, who did the forensic collection, when did they do this, where were they when they did this. Record hashes of any files you get off it, any memory dumps, any disk images. Just make sure that the files you have stay the same over time, and you're able to actually duplicate everything. Make sure your actions are repeatable. That's where the hashes kind of come in. Like if you take a disk image once, hash it. When you transport a file somewhere, if you hash again, it should be the same. All right. And order of operations. This isn't PEMDAS, thankfully, or GEMS, if any of you remember that from middle school or high school algebra. This is slightly more fun, in my opinion. So generally, The first thing that you want to do if you have a box or a machine that you suspect is compromised is take a volatile memory dump. This is like after you've done any like assessments to make sure we should isolate this a little bit more, make sure it's not actually actively harming anything. So those considerations come first. But the first thing you do in regards to forensics is hopefully capture that memory dump. This is because again, running processes, different caches, the list of network connections are typically only held in memory. And so if you do different things, if you shut down this box, you lose that precious information. And so we want to capture that as soon as possible because sophisticated attackers and other people are able to operate only in memory. If they don't drop anything to disk, it's a lot harder to log those sorts of things because it's not going to give us any file creation logs. We're not able to recover any like shadow copies or carve anything out of the disk because once the computer turns off, that memory is gone. So again, try and capture that memory dump as soon as possible. And just reiterating, try and mess with it as little as possible so we keep the memory dump in as pristine shape as possible. Second thing is to take a triage image. This is just basically a collection of the most important files and directories on a Linux box that we think are going to be the most important to piecing together what actually happened. So this is also, it can be some of the forensics artifacts mentioned earlier, /var/logs, SSH config directory, all those, the cron tab, those give us very important things, but we might not need like, I don't know, a random file in the temp directory. That might not be as important as those things. So once we have that, the triage image and the memory dump, one thing that we can do is take a full disk image. However, this is like really time consuming because you can have hard disks that can be hundreds of terabytes large. Normally they're not that big, but any sort of larger hard drive is going to take significant time, and we want to get started as soon as possible. So triage images are typically a way to go at the start, and you can do that later. Oop. All right, memory acquisition. So for Linux, there are really two main tools for this. One is acquire volatile memory for Linux, AVML, which who in this room wants to guess who made AVML for Linux? Somebody throw something out there.
Volatility?
No, actually.
No, okay.
No. Was it Linus Torvalds?
Yeah, that was my guess.
Guess? No. Oh, I want one more guess. Throw it out there. Michael, give me something.
You did.
Joey.
Microsoft.
Microsoft. Yeah. Microsoft.
Did they?
Joey, did you know that before for this?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Indeed. Written and developed and maintained by Microsoft. Fireball timing for Linux. That's just something funny. It's actually a very, very useful tool. It operates in user land, which is very nice, especially if you have limited permissions on a box. It reads RAM via the proc kcore and then the dev mem directories. This works on most common distributions and kernels. I mean, pretty much all of them, like that we would be using: Debian, Ubuntu, Red Hat, CentOS, Solaris, FreeBSD, OpenBSD. I mean, all of the major ones it works on, which is really nice because once you pull in the repo, compile the binary, once you have that, you can just like put on USB stick, plug it in one computer, get a memory dump, plug in another, and it just works like that. Or you can just send binary over the network. That works too. The thing is, make sure to write the image not to like the machine that you're getting the dump from, but to like a network storage or like a hard drive, because memory dump can be pretty large. I mean, ones of I have like 16 gigabytes RAM. Ron's got God knows how many in that thing. You all probably have anywhere between 16 to 32. If you put that on a hard disk, that changes some things in there, and also limits the applicability of the memory dump. It's like, what do you mean you wrote 32 gigabytes to the hard drive, Your Honor? Yeah, it's very easy to use. It's pretty much just sudo./avml, the name of your output file, and then it outputs .lime memory files, which can be used in volatility, even though this was not written by volatility. The second one is Lime. Lime is a little bit more funky to use. Linux memory extractor. This one was not written by Microsoft, funnily enough. But the thing is with this one, you have to compile a different kernel module specific to every machine's kernel. As you can imagine, if you're doing a whole bunch of different boxes in a forensic investigation, this would be hell because it requires downloading different symbols tables and recompiling this again and again. So if you find a Linux machine that AVML doesn't work on, figure out what the kernel is. Like I think it's uname-a, find out the kernel, and then compile the Lime kernel module, and then use that. But AVML is almost always going to be easier, and it's very easy to use. All right, triaging. So what would you guys rather do? Hand by hand to copy a whole bunch of files that you think are important to like a USB drive, or do it automatically? I know what I just use. The best automatic triage collector I found is UAC, Unix-like artifacts collector. There's others out there. Their names are not coming to mind right now, even though I looked at them today. But you can find others out there. UAC has, I think, the best ability to configure what you collect and just the speed in which it does this. Even when I do like full profile, everything on memdump as well, it can get it done normally in like under 5 minutes, which is a lot better than some of them out there. But anyway, UAC automates the collection of artifacts from a whole host of different Linux systems. More there. And what I think is really nice is you can determine exactly what it collects with YAML files. So like if you have the full profile right there, but you want to add on like another 10 items, you just full.yaml and then add a whole bunch of stuff on, or just copy and create a new one. This makes it super nice, especially if there's like some sensitive information you don't want to touch. Just cut those directories out of the YAML configuration file and still run it. It's pretty nice in that regard. And also, what makes this even better, this feature which I found on no other tool for automatic triaging on Linux systems, it allows you to, do a memory dump in this. The folder that you pull from GitHub has the AVML binary in it. So you just like add in the configuration file for AVML, and then you are cooking, which just makes this a one-liner. You do the last slide and this all in one go. That's pretty nice. Yeah. And then again, never rely entirely on automation. You can miss some things that way. Always make sure once you have that memory dump, most of this triage image done, go through the file system, see if there's anything that looks amiss. I like that line. It's a miss that UAC might miss. Anyway, again, I'll always make sure to write the images you create to external storage is to just affect the suspected compromised box as little as possible. Any questions about that? Cool beans. All right, disk imaging. This one's going to be pretty brief. So once we've done the above two steps, then it's generally a good idea to take a full disk image. So just like everything that is on the hard drive, we're going to collect it in one way or another. Again, this is super slow, but it's not terribly difficult. You have the DD command right there to write it out. You can also use Clonezilla, where you create like a live bootable USB, like shut down the target machine, plug that in, and you're able to read directly from the hard drive off of it. It's actually pretty cool. I'd recommend looking into that. But that does require physical access a lot of time. We're not going to be doing this for any competitions or labs, or I think really anything that we'd be doing in our home lab, because that takes a lot of time to do that. And in order to have like 20 people in here do that would be a nightmare. One, setting up, and also the box is not like self-combusting. Yes.
If at any point you guys are curious about disk imaging and you want to learn how to do some forensics based off of that, Stuart and I have plenty of experience having worked with disk imaging tools, and we'd be happy to show you pretty much outside of this. But if we do have time, like later in the semester, I could consider, showing you guys live up there. It just won't be relevant to what we're trying to do in our range.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks. No problem. Yeah, that's about all digital imaging. You have any questions about evidence collection as a whole? Anything of that nature? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is there anything that exists to go periodically do memory dumps without a human triggering it? Because I was like an R&D topic for Windows, it still doesn't exist. Is that even like feasible to do? Because if you could pull that off, it would catch advanced attackers like way better than anything we have now.
Yes. You can set that up somewhat easy with like the cron job and just have it send it to a remote destination. But I think Velociraptor already offers that.
Okay.
It takes up a ton of storage, but I think it is an option. I think you can make it even more granular. Like if you suspect like a specific chunk of memory or even just like a process, I think Velociraptor can dump that and then send it back up.
Yeah, I think the main question I had is, can you use that to check the integrity of the kernel without using, because it's really easy to go rootkit the command line tools, like an ls mod or something, right? That's pretty trivial. But having the rootkit stay undetected by the entirety of the RAM is really hard. What I was asking.
For that, I do not know. Okay. That's a good question. I'll look more into it. Definitely. But yeah, that'd be a good test for the forensic stack before Cyberforce. Get an idea of what's going on there. Okay. All right. I would write that down, but I put away my notepad. I'll look in the recording later. All right, cool. So moving on to the last section, live response. I would say after this meeting is over, I'm going to stay behind here or in the ACM room for like 30 to 40 minutes and work on a Linux forensics lab. I've linked it in the slide, and I invite as many of you can stay, work through that together. Unfortunately, I did not have time to put together an exercise for today besides that one lab. But that's just something that I would like all of you to do because it helps us get to know you a bit more, working through some stuff, put your skills to the test that we learned today. So recommend that if you all can show up. All right, so live response now. Okay, back to the competition stuff. So a lot of competitions, as I'm sure you've heard, are very high tempo scenarios where we get hit with something, service goes down, or get an inject telling us something, or we get a notification from like we installed Waza or something. It's like, hey, something is amiss, and we have to go threat hunt for it. A lot of the times we cannot do full evidence collection, like you mentioned, analysis, because that takes a lot of time to go and do, unfortunately. So a lot of our goal will be to identify suspicious processes, any actions, kill, not just kill, but thank you, Zoom. Appreciate the update. As the processes, just remove whatever vulnerability the attackers exploited and hopefully get our services back up and running so we keep racking up points. So this is less of like pure forensics and more of like we're trying to figure out what happened with our knowledge of forensics, but at the same time, we're trying to figure out how to get everything back up and running. So kind of combo the two. Right now, we're trying to increase a lot of the stuff that we do with this for Cyberforce. We're in the process of planning that out. We'll probably talk about that later when we have more of that figured out. But with that, we'd be able to do more traditional forensic stuff live because a lot of that would be automated. But we'll get back to you on that. Okay. And now, next few slides are going to be primarily focused on different commands you can use to find important information about different aspects of a compromised Linux box, figure out what all is going on. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to hit on some of the key ones. Hostname.f will display the fully qualified domain name. For DNS configurations for the firewall, that can be pretty useful for figuring out. And the other stuff here, like uname.a, that's how you figure out kernel version. All of that is pretty standard. User activity, If you want to figure out who is logged into a box at a given time, if you think there might be some malicious actor who's stealing credentials logged on the box where they might not be otherwise, guess what the command for that is? Ooh. Yeah, pretty self-explanatory there. Same thing with catting Etsy password and Etsy shadow. Shows you all user counts. It's like, for example, if malicious actor created like a fake user account, just maintain persistence and just always maintain or get a way back in. You can find it in Etsy password. I'll see the password hashes in Etsy shadow. Process information. This is a pretty good way of figuring out a lot of the just what all is running on a system. If there's some process with like a name that's just a whole bunch of gibberish or something like that, you can find it with a lot of the PS commands. AUX is used that a lot just to figure out what's going on. Same thing with PS tree, that just makes it look nicer to view because it also gives you that tree structure. Also look into different specific processes more with the process identifier. That also can help you give you like the specific command line to run it because if they run it with weird credentials in there from a user that's not logged into the system, that can help give you information into like what actually started this process. Is it legitimate or not? Which is very useful. All right, network connections and configurations. Figure out where or what the boxes are connecting to. If there's any funky firewall rules that may have been made to like allow like a bind shell going in or out. Probably won't be doing that. Bind shells are outdated, but that's always something you can find. Also different interface statistics. So if someone is doing data exfiltration and there's like 20 gigabytes being sent over some port in like the 40,000s range, that can help cue you in as to like something is going a little bit strange. Another interesting one is LSOF plus L1. So if there are any like deleted files that are still open with whatever thing, that is normal in some regards. But if there's a lot of those, that's a little wonky. Check that out. All right, firewalls, everyone's favorite. Definitely. Like Krish said, is it DNS? Yes, it's DNS. This is less so focused on that, but you can find all the different firewall rules, see if there's any weird exceptions carved out. If your box is being used to forward traffic further into a network, that can help cue you in there. See if like they turned off your firewall. These are all decent. Yes.
Let's say it's a command because I have no idea. That'll let you use an IP table to check if your box is being used to SOX proxy or reverse SOX proxy, like an SSH-D.
That should be possibly. Michael, would you know more about that?
No, actually.
Oh, it's not no worries.
Okay.
I think it would be actually pretty obvious forensically. I just never
Yeah.
out how to check for it. So I don't know if the forward list that.
Okay. Wait, because with the SOX, are you like making an rule in the IP table to do that?
I don't know. If you do a single port forward, it'll just create, either a port forward or a reverse port forward. For the dynamic chain, I think it does like one port still, and then it does the actual routing at like a protocol level. And then I don't know what that looks like for a reverse SOX. But I didn't know if that actually creates like an IP tables. You can go monitor for it, go see if it's being used like a relay box or something like that.
Okay. That is something that
Actually, it does have rules in the SOX proxy support. So there's a filter table, there's input, output, and then forward chain rules. So you have to look for anything that says forward. If you're looking at a relay, right?
Yeah. Okay. So possibly that.
We got to look at that. That's a good idea.
Yeah, that's something I haven't seen yet, so that would be cool. Krish?
Quick random thing. I don't know how useful this is, but I've done this before. The TCP dump command. If you're really trying to go into stuff and look at the exact traffic that's going out of something, you just type TCP dump and then like maybe like your Wi-Fi card or Ethernet card, and it shows you like literally every packet going back and forth. So and it gives you like a lot of information, like what type and like I don't remember too many specifics, but it gives you a lot of information about those packets, so that could also be useful.
Definitely. Yeah, TC don't is useful. I mean, heck, even using like a Wireshark capture essentially does the same thing. So always got to keep in mind all the different avenues for information gathering. All right. Again, open files and searching. LSOF is pretty good for that. See what files are open. You can see what files are being opened by a specific process. Like if there's something you suspect is being malicious, you can see what files it has open, see like what all it's doing in there. You can also, with find some specific files, you can do some crazy filters on there that make it pretty useful to find. Well, it's in the name of the command, but find some interesting things. Like if you want to find a bunch of files modified in the last 60 minutes, that could be relevant for us because there's still a time in the competition. You can just find all the things that have been modified recently, and it's like, hey, if it wasn't us, it wasn't. There's really only one or maybe two answers to that, so that's always useful. Also find files that have the SUID bit set because those can always be or sometimes be used for malicious purposes. Same thing with SGID or all executables. All right, this is more command line history. Already talked about that briefly. You can see all the commands. There are evasions around this, like Ronan mentioned. I believe there are some ways to keep logging it with audit D. I'm not entirely sure about that or where it would be stored, but again, these are always good places to check if they don't care about cleaning up your tracks as much. All right, more scheduled task stuff. This is how you find all of the all of the scheduled tasks on a system, the different cron tabs that you have, not just all the cron jobs. Again, for our purposes, we're in very short time frames. So if you want to look at all the cron jobs that run on the hour or the minute, you can add that modifier at the end of cron or etc cron dot, and you'll get those because they'll probably be a bit faster of a time frame. Same thing with systemctl. I don't think I talked about this as much, but our method persistence is creating like a malicious systemd daemon that again starts up upon restart or just starts up randomly, and those commands like show service name, the list timers, alternative cron, those can help you find other methods of persistence too. All right, a bit more on SSH keys. I already went over this as well. I mean, it's pretty simple stuff. Once you are at etc SSH, you can find all this pretty easy. All right, and that's about the end of the presentation. Got some links there. The God Doc of Linux Forensics, that is a fantastic resource. Has a whole bunch of the theory of how all of this works and how to find stuff in there.